Well, Russian forces are slowly tightening the noose around the eastern Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk, a key logistical hub whose main supply lines are under threat nearly 3 years after Moscow invaded its neighbor. While Ukraine is stubbornly defending the city, its encirclement or fall could put Russia in a strong position to mount attacks in several directions in the east and increase pressure on Kiev at a critical juncture in the war. According to the regional governor, 7,000 residents remain out of a pre-war population of 60,000. The last post office recently closed. Mail will now be delivered by a armored truck. On either side of the city, Russian troops are within artillery and drone range of a crucial highway that runs east to west along the entirety of Ukraine. Well, and for more on this development, international affairs analyst Dr. Marek Laskiewicz joins us from London. Marek, glad to have you join us on The World. Let's start with France saying about 50 deserters, or desertions, if you like, that it's marginal. I mean, desertions or deserters from Ukraine, about 50 of them, but France says it's marginal.
The central problem about the desertion is threefold. It is increasing. It is also sapping Ukrainian strength. And most of all, it's an indicator that the Ukrainian morale is, of course, after all these years of grinding war, at a ever lower ebb. And this is the worrying aspect of it, because we get one more sign that Ukraine might well be unable to carry on the war for very much longer, though in the short term, of course, it is still defending itself.
Let's turn to Russia. Russia forces gradually tightening the noose, closing in on a very important city of Ukraine, Pokrovsk. Ukraine is stubbornly defending that city. What are the implications if Russia eventually takes this city, if this city falls? What are the implications for both Ukraine and then, of course, neighbors, and then the wider world implications?
Yeah, the first and most obvious one is a military point. It is, as you said before, a logistical hub. It's a very important city. I call it is the key to that whole area, and therefore, from that point of view, capturing it will be important for Russia. But that's not the biggest aspect of it. The biggest aspect of it is that Russia is finally, if it makes this capture, mean that it is winning with a capital W. And that means that support for it will probably grow on the world stage, because on the whole, people support winners. And it's worse than that. For Ukraine itself, it would mean a very significant city has fallen. In World War I, a similar city was Verdun, which the French succeeded in holding, and as a result, the Germans eventually lost, in part because they failed to break through. The exact opposite is happening here. Russia is slowly winning a war of, if you like, attrition, but it is winning, and that is the problem, because if it breaks through, it is quite possible that they will be able to impose a peace on the grounds that Ukraine simply cannot recover any of this territory that Russia has conquered.
And relationships seems to be not quite good between Ukraine and Slovakia. Ukraine is actually calling the foreign minister Putin's mouthpiece, and Ukraine has summoned the foreign minister of Slovakia. What's your sense of this brickbat between the two countries?
There is a quite clear growing caucus of states in Central Europe which is not in favor of continuing the war. Slovakia, its leader, President Fico, has actually been to Moscow, the same as Viktor Orban from Hungary. And the point I is making here is that that local support, because they are that close to Ukraine, of its allies is dwindling here. In part, this is to do with the Russian gas and oil, which they can no longer have and which they need. But however you cut it, on Ukrainians now, if you like, immediate border, are unhappy countries like Hungary and Slovakia, who really don't see a point in this war continuing.
Now, let's talk Trump. Still on Ukraine anyway, but let's discuss Trump. Since Russia, or Putin rather, refused his offer, there seems not to be any activity, from Trump's side, any activity or any move from Trump's side on this Ukraine-Russia war. What do you think is happening?
Strange, yes. You'd have thought that Trump would carry on, but he hasn't. And this in itself is, well, questionable as a tactic, because the fact of the matter is that if Russia takes Pokrovsk, it will be a disaster to some degree. And yet Trump is staying quiet. He's not making any signs at all. And the impression rather is that the Russians succeeded in pushing him off, fending off his point that Russia must do something. Russia simply said, no, it wouldn't. And then Trump did nothing more, which is not very good for his prestige. A more interesting point is that when he puts up the tariffs, as he said he will, and by now must in order to retain prestige against Mexico and Canada, it's just one more step towards USA being more isolated and also, so to speak, at not very good relations with many other countries, which gives the impression of a fragmenting West at the very time when it should be holding together to support Ukraine to get a peace which would hopefully prevent future wars, but at the very least be not a defeat. As we are heading now, Russia is winning.
What does this do for Trump, in the international scene? I think he said something like, the first day when I step into office, the war will stop. And now Putin is not accepting his offer, nothing is happening. What does it do for him, his image in international circles?
Yeah, the big problem is the word prestige. Whole empires are founded because they lost prestige, so no one took them seriously. And here the problem is that Trump, if he does not speak about Ukraine, if he does not help, and Ukraine suffers a defeat, it will be defeat for America too, and for its prestige. And as a result, Putin will most probably carry on with other attacks. In my books, I anticipated Russia winning against Ukraine eventually, and then carrying on against other nations. So the front line, if you like, the line in the sand has to be drawn somewhere, and Ukraine is a very good point, but Trump's not doing it. Far from finishing the war in one day, it's as if he's turned his back on it, which is not good for the leader of the most important nation, if you like, in the world, and the leader of the West. Moreover, I point out that he's pursuing now policies which may make sense for America, qua America alone, America first, but it makes no sense in world terms, because if he's going to start a trade war, this plays directly into Russia's hands.
Lastly, before we let you go, EU seems to be the same thing. Trump he says he will use military on the Greenland. EU Council President Costa has been speaking up, and he says EU is totally backing Denmark and will do something if Trump takes any action otherwise.
Here, I'm afraid there's a double blow for the West. First and foremost, the EU will be shown up as totally impotent. If America ever did do something like that, the EU could do nothing militarily. It's not even clear it could do much economically, because actually it's Trump that holds all the trump cards. So the net effect of this will be to show that the EU is rich but weak. In other words, a prize, as I wrote in one of my books. However, it gets worse, because what we now have is a hostile, perhaps semi-hostile would be a better term, but certainly not a pleasant relationship between America and the EU. And this plays into Putin's hands. It's precisely the fragmentation of the West that he's seeking. And unfortunately, Trump, by pressing on Greenland, is contributing to this. Or whatever the explanations for his behavior on the grounds that in American hands, Greenland would indeed be a huge treasure trove economically because it's full of resources. The fact of the matter is, the way he's going about it is actually destabilizing the West and, as a result, the world.
That's Dr. Marek Laskiewicz there, our analyst speaking from London.